So I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay our respects to the elders past and present. Many of you may know that the Mega Meetup is the combination of 4 UX events happening in Melbourne. Ladies at UX came and asked if we wanted to put something on with them to celebrate the start of UX Australia, and that sounded excellent, so I roped in a couple other people, namely Popcorns and Prototypes, Dan over there, and also the UX Design Group of Melbourne. Florian put his hands up over there. Welcome. And of course, ladies at UX and UX gatherings. So we're very, very, very excited to see everyone here. So thank you all for coming out. I also want to do a massive shout out to our sponsors. So Zendesk, can we get a round of applause for Zendesk, please? A massive shout out to Agency Iceberg, so another round of applause for them. A massive shout out to REA Group. Another round of applause. Woo!
I think personally, when I first discovered UX meetup groups in Melbourne, it helped me tremendously. I started off as a UX of one. Everyone's been there, or hopefully, you know, are about to charge through with that experience. But yeah, definitely speaking to peers and lots of people with lots of insider knowledge definitely helps. So, just introducing our panel today, we've got Cathrine Hill, UX lead at ANZ currently, also teaching at General Assembly and a research candidate in RMIT. So if anyone uses Twitter, please feel free to start tweeting any questions if you might have them. I will keep checking. If you use the hashtag UXMM16, then I can check that for you. But so Cathrine has come from, well, has an obsession of Scotland apparently, and she also has an awesome story about a 3-legged haggis. So if you want to tap her on the shoulder and talk about that. We've also got Denise Jacobs, a prolific speaker, prolific writer, managed to snag her from UX Australia, so thank you. And also, Denise and I both have the same hot drink favourite, soy milk chai lattes, again. And also, she has an upcoming book called Banish Your Inner Critic, so it's all about creativity. And yeah, if you want to talk to her about that later, definitely feel free. We've also got Ashlea McKay. Oh, God, I said that 3 times in my head. UX Agony aunt, for anyone who is familiar with that, at Optimal Workshop. UX researcher on the research side at the moment. And also, Ashley's an AFOL. And if no one knows what that is, it means adult fan of Lego. So, tip for today. And last but not least, we've also got Rhett. I cannot say it. Luciani?
Thank you. He's not from Zendesk.
So Rhett is also a huge cycling enthusiast. If you Google it, you will see he's done very well. So, yeah, thank you for all the panellists, and let's get started. Right, so the questions that are up on the slides tonight have been surveyed from everyone who signed up to the Eventbrite, and we asked you, what challenges are you having at work? So this is how UX therapy works. You give us your problems, hopefully we can answer them. So moving on to the first question, I will hand that to down the line. All right, so how do you deal with pressure to move forward with designs that aren't testing well?
I can start this one.
Rhett. Yeah.
I've been in this situation quite a bit before. It's a really sucky spot to be in. When you know something isn't quite up to scratch, it's and you're under pressure, there's time pressure or something, and you can't, you're really hesitant to move forward with something. And I think probably, as with a lot of these kind of problems, like communication is key here, right? If you're blocked on something, if you're stuck on something, like talk to people, get help from people, talk to your team, a really important idea here is that problems are like, they're a good thing, okay? If you've found a problem with something, that's the first step to being able to solve that problem. So, you know, there's too much negativity around these kind of things. And, you know, everyone's like freaking out and it's like, oh, what are we going to do? Like, it's a half glass empty, half glass full kind of situation. Spin it around the other way. Try and get your team on board with making it a positive thing. We've found this problem. Let's fix it. Like, let's make something better. If anyone wants to...
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Rhett. Yeah, for me, it's definitely about evidence building with your stakeholders and the people that you're working with, and having a shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve, understanding the success criteria of what your goals are, in terms of what you're trying to release to your users, whether it's technology-based or a non-technology service provision. So thinking about that, and if there is dispute around what the winner should be, and there's different opinions around which designs are better, you can always split test and, you know, use different kinds of strategies to work out what the best result will be.
I definitely agree with all of that too, especially the bit about communication being key. I would also recommend, in regards to the pressure itself, is have a look at where that's coming from and what's behind that, because there could be opportunities there that you could definitely make the most of.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, the source of the pressure is probably something worth looking at. Often it could be a really big deal. It could be a looming deadline, something really huge, and then the issue that you've encountered in testing could be relatively minor. So you need to weigh these two things up. If you've got a really big looming deadline and something that's, you know, pretty minor, then maybe you let it go. And the good thing about the medium we work in is that you can change stuff, right? You know, you let it go for a little while and then down the track you can kind of address it and fix it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Choose your battles.
Great. Right, question 2. What are the strategies for interdepartmental communication on best practices and accessibility? So here we're talking about edge cases, understanding, empathy. Go.
I'm happy to start this one. So I've, before I joined PwC as a consultant, I had a past life as a public servant. So a very big department with 20,000 people, lots of, I think it was 20 different business lines. And I think the key for the communication is to just bring people together, like actually bring them together in the same room and do a bit of a knowledge share, like, you know, understand each other and sort of build that shared understanding and that empathy for what you all bring and what you all do and what your roles are. And that I feel can really help bridge that gap.
Yeah, like the obvious kind of solution that jumps to me here is like, talk about your work. Share your work with people, present your work. If you've just finished a project, put it in front of people, get some opinions, or even if you don't like presenting work, just talk about it over lunch. Like, and the more you do this, the more these people will start to learn more about what we do is in UX or in product design or whatever you want to call it. And it'll just foster this really good learning environment, which hopefully people will embrace. And then you might start learning things about other parts of the business that you're in.
I have a cross-disciplinary team at ANZ where we've got different focuses on UI and UX. So getting the empathy across to people who may not be experienced with research is sometimes challenging. So doing exercises like the How to Make Toast activity is really great. I don't know whether you've heard of that before, but
Let's get a toaster.
yeah, you pretty much you know, have a group workshop where you know, sketch out how to make toast, and everyone has a different, you know, skew on that. Usually there's common themes, but everyone has a slightly different process, and it helps people understand mental models and empathy for difference of opinion. In terms of accessibility, it's usually about education. It's not legislation. Well, there is supporting legislation in Australia, but it's been legislated overseas. So thinking about your audience and who you're actually delivering services or applications to or systems, and thinking about how inclusive the organisation should be. Most people want to include most people, so and not exclude people who have disadvantages or disabilities. So understanding the value of that and having the right people to test your software or services is really important.
I have nothing to add to that. You guys are killing it. I'm just here to support you.
Just out of interest, is there anyone from the audience that specifically deals with accessibility as part of their work? That's not a huge representation. Yeah.
It's kind of
I mean, I think
it is.
hopefully accessibility is at the point now where it's more of a given. Like, this isn't something that you should really be picking and choosing whether to include in your process. It's like, this is something we all need to do. It's like, if you want a really great design, then this needs to happen. So
I feel like, sorry, I do want to actually weigh in, but this is just an opinion. This is not like fact or anything like that. But I feel like accessibility has been and still is an afterthought, because people who are normally abled, quote unquote, you typically don't think otherwise, right? And it's usually somebody who has to say, excuse me, that's actually, like, there's this whole other group of people that you need to think about. And usually people are kind of so blind to their own perspective that they can't see other perspectives. So I would imagine that accessibility is still something that people have to kind of stand up for.
Yeah, I mean, at ANZ we have 2 accessibility experts in a population of 60,000. I think it's between 50 and 60,000 workers, and building systems for internal staff as well as external customers puts that into light. The ratio of people who are actually testing our software is really small. So it's definitely important.
yeah, I've actually been a part of usability testing for, there's a website in my previous job. I'm not sure if people are aware of Scope, which is disability services for, all the people of Melbourne. And it was really, really eye-opening. If anyone ever has a chance to do something like that, I totally recommend it. I looked at everything from people with no limbs trying to navigate a website, really poor eyesight or no eyesight, deaf people. It's fascinating. If you ever get a chance to do that kind of thing, like, leap on it, because it'll change the way that you view design in general.
Question 3, flying through these. Right, so how do juniors get started in the industry? Hence, I am not qualified for the majority of the roles advertised. Tips and tricks.
I do too.
No.
You go first, because you're like,
Fine.
I love this question. So as for not being qualified for the roles advertised, I would say stop reading job ads. It's true. So much about what we do in UX is about building relationships. We build relationships with our clients, with our users and our team, and that starts at the very beginning. So I would recommend for juniors out there, make a list of like 10 companies you want to work for, 10 people you want to work with, and go find yourself a team of people that you really like and that you want to spend, we spend like a third of our lives at work. Like, it's terrible. So you have to spend it with people you actually like. So I would say, yeah, stop reading job ads and go find yourself people that you really want to work with.
I have a particular soft spot in my heart for this question too. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to say, and the first one is that job ads are typically written by people who don't know what the, can I cuss here? Are we friends? Who don't know what the fuck they're saying, right? So a lot of times they're done by HR people who have really no idea of the scope of the job, and they're just putting in like buzzwords, right? They're like, and you must have human-centered interaction background, and you must have a blah, 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 and they don't know, they're just trying to fill a job, right? So there's that problem, first of all. Then the second problem is not from their side, but from your own side. There's something called imposter syndrome. You guys are probably really familiar with it, right? Imposter syndrome, for the most part, you think that you're not as qualified as you are. So if you see a job list advertisement and it's got 5 things listed and you only have 3, don't say, I'm not qualified for the job. That is your opportunity to say, that job is perfect for me because I don't have those 2 things and I can learn them on the job, right? The other thing is that imposter syndrome, I'm glad this is Ladies Who UX, because imposter syndrome affects women who are competent really strongly. And so, I'm sorry, guys, like I love men. I just want to let you know, this is not personal. This is actually substantiated by studies that typically when you see that 5, a guy will say, great, I will totally apply for it. Matter of fact, he might have 2 out of the 5 and he'll be like, sweet, I'm so there. A woman will look at it and have 4.5 out of the 5 and say, I'm not qualified. I shouldn't apply for it, right? So that whether or not you're qualified is in your head, right? You go and you make the relationships and you connect with the people and stuff, and you go and you put your best foot forward. And also remember that you have transferable skills. You may not have the actual skill itself, but you have transferable skills that can potentially make up for it because you're going to learn things on the job. And I could talk more about this, but I don't want to take away anybody else's thunder. So if anything else comes back, I'm going to bring back the microphone. But that's my beginning bit of it.
I was going to say, Denise, it's kind of AKA fake it till you make it, except it's rephrased in the case of women. Definitely, and that's a pretty broad topic that we could talk about for a while. In terms of, hiring, I wouldn't say that I could hire anyone who doesn't mention the words empathy in the hiring process. So how do you build empathy? That's a good question. And it's usually something that comes with the field. So you may educate yourself around how do I empathise with others? What is empathy? It's different to sympathy. How do you build that? And that's through research and understanding, evaluation, validation, listening to people. And a lot of people don't realise that listening is so important. So a much undervalued characteristic of a UX designer and something that we really value in industry.
I'm actually going to use myself as an example on this one.
Yeah.
I received some really good advice when I was starting out, and it was kind of probably not what I wanted to hear at the time, but it was just to be realistic, and any experience that you're going to get at the start of your career is better than no experience, all right? So the first job I had was at a furniture store. It was a design job. I'm not talking I was on the floor at a furniture store. But on the surface, it looked like a pretty average job. It was like catalogs, advertising, really crappy stuff. I didn't look at that job and go, hey, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get some really awesome stuff for my portfolio out of this. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. But I took it anyway. I was like, I'm going to just go for it. This was, maybe a month or so after I'd graduated. I'm like, I'm just going to do it. A lot of people that I studied with were holding out. They were just going to wait and find the perfect job. And I was like, well, while they're doing that, I'm going to actually start learning some stuff. So I went for it. I got the job, and it was boring. I was doing a lot of catalogs, a lot of advertising, but there was so much I learned around that. I was the sole creative person in this business. And so I had an advertising budget, and I got to meet all the ad reps and, decide what I wanted to advertise in. I got to organise photo shoots for new products. There was all this stuff, and I got to art direct those photo shoots. So some really cool stuff. They put so much trust in me that they shouldn't have. Well, they didn't mention any of this stuff at the job interview, so I was like, oh, this will be interesting. But my point is here that there's all this stuff that I learned that wasn't necessarily directly related to design and becoming a better designer, but contributed to me becoming a better designer and then just getting a better job when I went for it, when I was done there. So never discount stuff that you're going to learn that isn't directly related to design. Of course, you want to kind of get a job in the field where you're aiming for. You're not going to go get a fashion design job if you want to be a UX designer or something. But there's just a plethora of skills, time management, you know, heaps of stuff that you're going to learn that is totally invaluable, which will help you get your next job.
Awesome. So next question, how do I find out what the business values are so that I can prove the worth of UX?
Ask someone.
Like they're going to tell you.
I know.
This is kind of like a twofold one, right?
Probably, well, there's such a thing called, sorry, I've had 2 beers and I'm having water now to sober up. Divergent thinking, which is hugely important when you start an inception, which is a phrase that is used by some companies and practices to describe the beginning of problem solving. So bringing everyone in the room, and as I said before, you know, going on a shared journey, have a shared understanding. Those are core Agile values as well. I'm a big advocate for Agile. So thinking about how do you get a community together of advocacy for what you're trying to solve, and getting those people together in the room so they feel like they're part of that journey. And that can help you eliminate risk in terms of missing business intent around the problem you're looking at, and, you know, establishing who the domain experts are, subject matter experts in the business, getting together and actually executing on different deliverables as a result of that information that you're sharing. So that's a really good way to start.
I'd like to add, well, I feel like I'm like the Debbie Downer of the day, but my experience, my observation has been that there's one thing where there's the professed business values, and then there is the actual business values, right? So if you go and ask somebody and say, hey, so what do you feel like your business values are? And they're like, oh, we are completely about delivering services and products to our customers and really building community. And then you find out that they're not doing any of that, right? And so I guess part of the question is, too, how much time do you have, right, to actually observe versus just listen to information? And then the other part of it is a lot of what Kath was saying was about actually finding out what the pain points are, right? And finding out what they're actually struggling with, so that you can come and you can say, okay, this is what you're struggling with. This is what I've observed as hard. Is this really actually what's hard? And they'll be, oh my God, nobody's put this in this many words and articulated it as such. And you say, okay, look, the solution, as far as, you know, from what we can do this, we can apply UX to this, and we can solve this problem. And I think that actually proves the worth that, and then you actually put your money where your mouth is, right? Like you actually walk the talk, you actually use UX to prove the value of UX so that you can apply UX. Ha. I feel like I finally contributed something. Yes.
I can't follow up that.
All right.
Yay.
Peace.
Anyone to add to that?
Sometimes there's dedicated roles involved in the establishment of understanding the business values, and sometimes the UXs play that role as well. Different people can overlap in what would be traditionally a system analyst or business analyst role, for example, and you know, sometimes the UXer plays that role, so you have to have some slice and dice capability to eliminate what's important and be able to prioritise quickly. So there are techniques to follow a prioritisation methodology, and you can, you know, do journey mapping and story mapping, and there's a whole lot of wonderful frameworks that you can use to work through those problem-solving techniques in a way that is rapid. So it's worth doing some research around those practices and helping yourself along that journey, because sometimes you may have to play that role.
Say one thing.
Yeah.
There's a great book that just came out on story mapping.
Is it your book?
It's not my book. It's a friend of mine's book. Her name is Donna Lichtow, and that just came out through Rosenfeld Media, and she teaches a wonderful process on story mapping, and I highly recommend it. So
Did that at book club
Oh,
a
see?
couple of months ago.
Ha, 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 ha.
Thanks, boys.
That wasn't set up at all.
Great. So how do you know what the focus of your research project should be? So this is based on the fact that you start a project, you're so excited, you can test, research, do everything. Go.
Do you know what I love about user research? It's scalable and it can be structured in just about any way. So yes, you can literally test and research, investigate everything, but you can also do it in any way possible. And you can I would recommend putting structure around it. And, you know, if it's a really, really big thing, then consider testing it in little bites. Like have a testing schedule where you test little features, and then that way you can also iterate along the way. And then if you find something early on that's crap, you've got time to iterate it, and then you can like test it again a bit later on when you're testing other stuff. So you can sort of tailor it to be whatever you need it to be. You shouldn't feel restricted by it at all, other than, and if you want to sort of rein it in, just scale it.
There's different phases of research too. It depends on where you are with the problem definition and understanding what you're trying to solve. So you'd be looking, I had some colleagues who went to Heinrich Muller's session today at UX Australia around introduction to user research. And he had a great model there that was about foundation research and iterative research and evaluative research, which was amazing. And it's a great model to see introduced to new people. Because often it's difficult to define a strategy with research if you're inexperienced. So always check out existing models, I suppose, and understand what stage you're at in terms of the problem definition, whether or not you're pivoting, starting fresh, or redefining an existing problem and iterating on that. It can lead you in a direction with your methodology.
Yeah, this is something I've admittedly probably not been the best at in the past. It's kind of a balance between trying to learn what you think you need to know and then not leading the research into those areas as well. It's kind of really hard to balance. You want to keep it kind of as high level as you can, but still get the information that you need. And sometimes that can be difficult to do. What you think the problem might be is in a lot of cases not always the problem. So how do you discover that without, you know, subconsciously telling someone what you think the problem is? It's a difficult thing, and it's something I'm still kind of improving at, but it's.
Often the challenge for UX teams is the fascination with outliers, or I suppose edge cases, you could call them, where you find something fascinating and it's not necessarily related to what's considered a priority, and that's always really challenging for a team, especially when you've got a product roadmap to consider and potentially a UX roadmap as well. So I suppose working out what's important and what needs to be investigated later, what can be backlogged for later, research and investigation is always important. So having that experience level in your team is quite good. If you don't, then you need to work with others and collaborate and discuss about those topics to make sure that those things aren't forgotten and those users aren't forgotten, and potentially those gaps in your product area and value proposition aren't forgotten either.
Right, over to you. I've been checking the Twitter feed. No one's tweeted any questions, so we have to steal one of these. Yeah.
So who's got a question? All right, Kristen, of course. Yes.
It's messed up.
Oh, wait, hold up. I got one of these
Well, I
things.
could shout, but this works too. I'm actually just curious about your favorite facilitation warm-up, because I've used the toast one a lot, and I'm just wondering if there are any other fun ones that you like to do? Because I know that there's the game storming book, but I'm a bit lazy, so.
So a former colleague of mine, he calls them energizers, and he has this one where he has a bunch of quotes, and he gets the room to figure out if it was said by Taylor Swift or Margaret Thatcher. It's pretty cool. You'd be surprised which one said which.
One nice one that I saw a colleague do at ThoughtWorks, Lucy Power, who's an awesome chick and really senior in UX, but not very well known in Melbourne. She's got a great warm-up, which is just getting your neighbour to draw a picture of you and then describe it to the group. And it's always a nice way to get people, to get to know each other and think about the people next to them.
I have a few that I use and that I use with a colleague of mine. One of them is if there's a group of people at the table to do what she calls a commonality boggle, which is to have everybody try to figure out something that they have in common. And they just kind of run through things like, do you have brothers and sisters? Yes. Great. Okay, we all have siblings. Has anybody gone to France? Yes, we've all gone to France. And then you find kind of what you run through within over a period of like 3 minutes or something like that. You try to find out everything that you have in common. Another one is to have each person tell the person next to them something about themselves and to have them figure out what they have in common, and then the next person tells the next person until everybody does that, and then somebody gets up and kind of explains what everybody does. And then the final one is if you've got a group of people, and actually this is actually kind of an interesting one from a UX perspective, is to have everybody line up by their birth date, by their month and their day, but they have to do it without talking. So they have to figure out how to communicate that information to each other, and they have to do it chronologically so that everybody starts at January, goes all the way to December, and then you kind of see how well people were able to communicate and innovate on different ways to communicate to get that lineup.
We actually did that exercise in this very room. So we had a snake of people wandering all the way down the back and then down the side here. So we had the young people over there. It's actually not as hard as you would think. We were surprisingly close, but we had a whole heap of young, smug people over here and a whole heap of really grumpy-looking old people over here. And but it was really good. It was a lot of fun. I was right in the middle. I'm neutral.
That's all.
Any other questions? Coming around, looking at people, yes.
How about warming up the exec?
What do you mean exactly?
Well, if you're dealing with the C-level, how are they the techniques that you'd use with those guys as well?
I don't see any difference. As a matter of fact, they are the ones that need the fun exercises the most.
Sure.
No, seriously though, think about it. If you're an exec, like there's a whole level of things that are happening, right? Like you're responsible for more things. You don't get to have the hands-on experiences. A lot of times people get moved up into management and they actually want to stay practitioners. And then they've got the level of expectation that they should do something in a certain way, but they may not want to do that, or they may not know what they're doing, and they may be experiencing imposter syndrome themselves. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, I think, with execs. So anything that they can do that gets them to relax and loosen up and be more receptive is really important. And sometimes the more playful it is, the better, because they actually don't get enough. I don't think they get enough of an opportunity to do that.
And just remember that they are people as well. They're just like us,
People too.
Exactly. Sorry.
I found exercises like Design Studio are actually quite effective with executives. It's surprising how democratizing it is to draw together, especially when it's not about the skill of drawing or about how good you are. You make it very clear in the room that it's not about, achievement. It's about expression and, research. So often it's a great way to get everybody to put ideas on paper and not have that kind of hierarchical expression that you get when people are actually talking together and very aware of grade levels, for example, like if they are at the bank where I work, or, considering the fact that there's a very senior person in the room and they may have to be quiet because that person's about to speak, or their opinion's considered more important. So that's a really great way to get people to think.
I think our CEO is probably the exception here. Mikkel is just constantly telling us to have fun and break shit.
One more exercise that is actually a really fun exercise. There you go. It's called point and name. And so what you do is you have everybody walk around the room, and to point, let me see if I can remember it correctly, is to point at an object, but to name it, say it's something completely different. So example, if you point at the floor, you say flower and ice cube and beverage and stuff like that. And you do that, and then you also do it again, another iteration, but the way you do it is the last thing that you point at. So if I just pointed to chair, if I point to the floor, I say chair, and then I say floor, and then I say ceiling, and then I say post, right? And I know it's a total mind fuck, right? But so you do those, and you do both iterations, and then afterwards you debrief, and you say, okay, how many of you found it easier to do it the first way? And a number of people will raise their hands. And then you say, okay, how many people found it easier to do the second way? It's just about your brain works differently. People's brains work differently, and it also means that they process things differently. They think about things differently. They come up with solutions differently. And when you see that people do these things differently, you can also see like, oh, we actually have different strengths, and we kind of work together differently. I think that's a good one for execs, and I think that's a good one as a warm-up because it just kind of gets people a little off kilter, and it opens them up to start thinking about things differently as well.
All right, any more questions? Right behind me.
I was just curious about, with working with Agile and having a UX roadmap and a product roadmap, how does that work?
Okay. I suppose, one of the problems is how do you house innovation in what would be essentially a feedback loop from UX into a product roadmap, and evaluating how that relates to, new product opportunity. It can be, I think, a problem with the organisational structure at times. So in my experience as a UX designer in Agile practices, often that hasn't been resolved. And I think gradually the industry is maturing, and we're seeing that often the way we prioritise insights can feed into new product investigation. With the UX roadmap, it's usually housed within priorities within the UX team, so it's down to the methodology and framework of the UX practice. So there may be objectives that relate to how UX is actually evolving within the business and how the practice relates to affecting change with the user. So it's a little bit conceptual, whereas with the product roadmap, by its nature in an Agile practice, that should be adjusted over time. It shouldn't be a fixed thing, and it should be reviewed. So there's a whole lot of stuff that, requires maturity and communication between people in order to make that happen.
We're on?
Yeah, any more questions? Oh, here we go. Nice.
So, Cathrine, you mentioned organisational change just there. And given that things like org change and moving the needle on UX maturity can take a really long time, I'm just really interested to hear from all of you in your careers, how have you worked out the whole should I stay or should I go dilemma?
I think it's a constant flux. For me, it's been partially due to feeling the culture, so knowing whether or not change is possible. And as you become older, you probably become better at perceiving whether or not the fight is bigger than you or you can fight the fight. So friendship's really important to me in my career, and moving through businesses, I always make sure I make friends and treat people the right way, and the objective is to keep the friends that I make because they're part of the community. But in terms of the organisation, you can only really measure that from the problem space that you're engaging with. So I frequently say to the people I work with and tell myself, you know, am I able to make change? And if I'm able to see that I can, then there's worth in staying on. And I suppose sometimes persistence is needed to make that change happen, and you need to work out whether or not you can do that on your own, or if you need other people on your team or tribe to do that with you. So that requires alignment and, you know, being able to understand that everyone has the same goal, and, you know, that requires communication as well. So I'd say there's a whole lot of stuff that informs you over time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's much more important to be working with people that you respect and you like and you enjoy working with than it is to have awesome projects every day of the week. Like
What they said.
Yeah.
Could I just add to that? So that's like takes a big mental toll to kind of get to that point where you understand whether you want to do that. Could you talk about some of the practices that we can do to make sure that our mental health is okay while we're kind of coming up against these regular fights in the business?
Yes. I think one of the things, so I'm just going to mention it now since it's like where my brain is. But so, by the way, I hold up this book, but I just want you to know that it is a mock-up. So people are like, oh my God, I've got to see it. I'm like, I'm writing it, like in the process of writing the book. So it's not written yet. So when I say I'm writing it, I'm actually literally in the process of writing it, and I'm about halfway through with it now. But one of the things that I've kind of been kicking around conceptually in the last chapter is self-trust and how important it is to really trust yourself. And sometimes that's hard if you're like junior, or you're transitioning, or you're moving, you know, from one career to another or one position to another, or you're meeting a lot of resistance in the position that you're in and everything. But I think there still is a place where you're just like, no, this is actually important work, this is necessary work, and this is something that I am good at. Right? And that I actually am knowledgeable about, and that I can actually help these people with. And so when you're in that kind of place where you're battling that self-doubt, it's so much easier said than done, but to like kind of put yourself to kind of guide yourself back to a place of self-trust, right? Like I was talking to somebody, I had coffee with a friend earlier today, and he says, yeah, I'm in this place, but when you're in a place where you don't know exactly what you're going to do next, it can be terrifyingly beautiful. And I was like, oh, that's lovely, right? But I said, but what happens a lot of times is that we're so focused on the terrifyingly part that we never get to the beautiful part, right? And so if you realize that it is the two together, it is terrifyingly beautiful together as a whole, that if you stop focusing on how afraid you are that you don't know enough, or you're not going to get it right, or that you're not getting the support or whatever, if you take your focus away from that and start focusing on the like, no, I've got this. This part, I'm solid because I've got this background, or I've got this knowledge, and start focusing on the, okay, since I've got this, let's focus on how we can make this positive, like how we can make this good. Then that can potentially shift that. Like I said, not easy. When you're in the terrifying part, it is terrifying and it is hard to get out of that. But when you start to go like, wait a minute, this is actually where I'm putting my focus, and you know that your brain is doing that. I read something that said there's a mindfulness trick that says that once you recognize that your brain is going to do that, then you can choose to not do it. Like you can say, okay, you're gonna go and do that. I actually am choosing to focus elsewhere. And just know that it's gonna do that and say, great, you do that, and when you're done, I'm just gonna go and look over here. So there's a trick, it's an awareness thing, but it's something that can potentially help.
I'll just add to that the best piece of advice that I've ever been given around this was just to remember that no matter how crap it gets, it's only work. Like, your life is so much bigger than that. So it's about, I guess, maintaining that perspective. It's just work, you know?
Yeah.
I suppose I try and craft my attitude to the work as optimistic pragmatism, because usually you have to be practical in what we do and evaluate problems pretty clearly, and you don't need to induct that into your own being. It is about the user and you care about them, and I think one of the problems is that UXs by their nature have huge amounts of empathy and could be on the spectrum, I'm not sure, speaking for myself, but you know, in terms of that level of empathy, how do you tap that? And when you care about the product or the end user's experience, sometimes that can become incredibly deep and you can become invested in the outcome. So over time, just like it is with design, you have to depersonalise what you're doing and understand that you can only try your best and get the best result for many people. And if the business actually has the resources and capability to support other people other than the main segments or audiences that they're dealing with, then that's fantastic. But sometimes they can't. So you might identify key flaws in the product and experience that you just can't rectify, and that can be difficult for some people. So, you know, it's just about managing that.
Any other questions? Staring at people.
Hey, turn around.
There you go. I'll come back to over there. This is a longer walk.
So my question's only half put together at the moment, but getting back to accessibility that was mentioned earlier, who should be the person that actually owns accessibility? Does it belong to the UX practitioner? Does it belong to the business or the developer? Because I see it as one of those things that often gets forgotten or it's not funded. And you brought up earlier about certain user groups not making the cut. How do we make sure that that ethical element is actually adhered to?
I mean, ultimately, in my opinion, this should be the concern of anyone and everyone involved in the project. Like, it's such a big deal. It shouldn't be disregarded by anyone. It kind of goes back to that first question of what do you do when you're feeling that pressure to move a project forward and, you know, something's testing badly. Accessibility can kind of fall into that area where it just gets kind of thrown by the wayside. But if everyone is on board with it and everyone understands the value of it, then it should be at the forefront of everyone's mind.
And accessibility is not just about being a nice person, although generally designers are. Usually it's also about risk, managing risk for a business and helping them understand the fact that if they do exclude these users or their workers or anyone who engages with a product or system or a service, inevitably that's a problem for the business over time. So building that in early, for example, in technology is really important. It can affect the code base and the legacy systems. It can affect other things as well, such as architectural implementation. So there's a lot of things to think about.
Is there another one over here that I missed out? Oh, is it Kristen again? Oh, round two.
Well, okay, everyone's death staring me. and you probably want to get a drink or socialize. So this is just a wrap-up question, a fun one. I'm just wondering, I'm curious, and this is a bit leading, but assuming that you like what you do, why do you like being in UX or experience design?
This is a broad question.
Do you want to start?
No, not really.
I'll start. I just really like, so my story is I'm an industrial designer, and in my third year of uni we had this project where we had to identify a product or a service that existed and study it and then figure out what was, and redesign a better one. And my favourite part about it was, so I live in Canberra. Is anyone here from Canberra too? No. Oh, yes. Woo-hoo. Anyway, so you can tell me how shitty action buses are, right? Yep. Okay, so I chose our public transport system, and my favourite part of it was following people around the bus interchange. I just fell in love with that type of research. Like my classmates were designing cars and kettles, and I was like, no, I want to follow people around and watch them and learn from what they do and design better experiences for it. So it started for me all the way back at uni. It was just loved it. It was just solving that problem and understanding what is going on in their heads. It was just, it was awesome.
That's really creepy. For me, I kind of always knew I was going to get into design. There was kind of no question there. When I started out, I was more into kind of branding, identity, print design, eventually moved into web design. And they're two very different fields. I think with the branding-based stuff, everyone's got an opinion. There's no kind of right and wrong answers. There is to a degree, but what I like about UX is that you've either solved the problem or you kind of haven't. There's less grey area for UX, which is something that I found really appealing.
I suppose I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I definitely wanted to be a fine artist or a designer, and I chose design and then realised my ideas were too abstract, so became a fine artist, and then I went back to design. I think a lot makes sense now because I look back at my history, and I worked in customer service while I was a student and did market research. It was incredibly boring. I used to get so bored. I used to tap my desk repeatedly when I was fidgety, and I couldn't leave the desk because we had allocated toilet breaks, and it was really terrible. But it was a shitty job. It was really crap. But I look back at that now and I think, wow, I really learned a lot. And actually Peter Grierson, who was here earlier tonight from REA, went through a similar experience. He also worked in market research and customer service before he became a researcher. And it does give you a craft. It helps you understand Likert scales and listening to people and probing for answers, investigating further if you need to. So it all makes sense now, but at the time it made absolutely no sense at all. Now I worked through being a developer as well as a designer and working in web design, and became really interested in interaction design through doing a diploma after my degree, and then became a UXer, so it was evolving.
I realized by listening to these fine people giving their answer, and I was actually trying to think, I was like, well, I'm not a UX person, I'm a creativity evangelist, and I help people unblock their creativity so that they can do kick-ass work. And then I thought about it, and I thought, wait a minute, I think I am a UX person because I'm actually trying to help kind of maximize this experience of work, right? Now that I'm thinking about it. And so I do this because I know how it feels to, and almost everybody does know how it feels to be in that state where you're completely engaged and you're completely in love with this thing that you're doing and what you're making, and when you reach a flow state, how incredible it feels. And it's the kind of thing where it's like it's like you're flying and then you come back to earth and you're just like, again, how can I do that again? But a lot of times we don't actually know how it is we got into that state, right? It's like coincidental or accidental. We don't know what the process was. And I thought if I could figure out a way to really break down the process or break down and clarify what is actually happening, like on the way to that state, then we could replicate it more easily, and we can actually get to that place where you're doing right work, you're doing the kind of thing that actually, that's like soul satisfying and self-actualizing, and that you're actually able to produce something that potentially will make the world a better place. And that's why I do what I do.
Awesome. I think that's a fantastic note to wrap up on. Do you want to?
Right. Well, I've definitely learned something today, and that's why I come here and learn every day. But big thank you. Thank you for volunteering your time and coming in and sharing with us. Now, Rowan's actually got a couple of gifts, just as a nice little thank you. Because you're doing this out of love, but
it's not money, but it's close.
It's not.
It would be good.
By the way, can I do a nice?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in the book, it talks about the inner critic and how to silence it so that you can get that out of the way, get you out of your own way so that you can do great work. If you want to sign up on the mailing list for announcements for it, it's my website, denisejacobs.com/innercritic. So please go and sign up on the mailing list. I've got a beta readers list as well that you can sign up on, and the book should be, if all things go according to plan, should be coming out in January of 2017. So it's coming soon.
Thanks. Could I just say as well that I had like a very brief conversation with Denise and didn't realize how much anxiety I actually had when she was explaining what was in this book. So if you're working on...
Maybe I'd put it on you.
Well, if you're working on your own or you're stressed out at work, I would highly recommend trying to catch up with Denise in the next couple of days at UX Australia, and definitely getting on that mailing list because it will change the way that you tackle your own problems. Awesome. And so can we get another round of applause for Cathrine, Denise, Ashlea, and Rhett? Another thing that I would like to say is that these things don't happen out of thin air. It takes an amazing team of volunteers who don't want to get paid and want to spend their hours listening to me talk, listening to other people talk. So I want to thank Rachel, Charlie, Kate, Amelia, Susu, Niam, Justin, Viveka for being the volunteers. And I want to thank the organising committee, Gemma, Renee, Dan, Ramya, Florian, Sarah, Ian from Zendesk, Pedro, and myself. Shameless. I also want to remind you that the 4 meetup groups that made this possible, Ladies at UX, follow them on something, UX gatherings, follow them on something. There's email, you're all on the email list now, so haha. UX Design Group of Melbourne, Prototypes and Popcorn. These are the meetups that try and get people together and talk about things. I want everyone to kind of come away with this feeling a bit closer in the community. We're going to get kind. We're going to get kind. We're going to talk about some feelings. I really want people to walk away from this and be like, you know what? Work isn't as bad as I thought it was. There are other people going through the same struggles. I found someone that I spoke to today who also hated their boss and was also having problems, but I can get up and I can go on and I can do better things. And I want everyone to give themselves a round of applause and go out there and be amazing.